Okay, let's just jump right into this explainer because what we're going to talk about today is going to fundamentally shift how you look at chronic conditions, stress, and human neurodiversity. I mean, if you've ever felt like standard medical advice treats your body like a machine with a single broken part, when your actual lived experience feels way more like a complex ecosystem that's out of balance, well, you are definitely not alone. Today, we're unpacking the Evolutionary Stress Framework. It's this absolutely fascinating lens that completely reframes what it actually means to be healthy, what stress really is, and honestly, why human minds and bodies are built so differently in the first place. We've got a lot of incredible ground to cover today. We're going to start with part one, the linear medicine trap, then move into redefining stress and robustness. After that, we'll look at architecture, not a pathology, explore tuning dials versus rewiring, and finally wrap up with the power of interdependence. So think about this for a second. What if our medical models are actually built for the wrong level of reality? That's the crucial question we have to ask ourselves right now. Because when our standard, run-of-the-mill, find-it-and-fix-it approach comes up against complex, multi-system conditions, it often just fails. We're seeing this massive, undeniable rise in chronic, context-dependent conditions, autoimmune issues, chronic fatigue, complex neurodevelopmental profiles, and yet we keep throwing the exact same simplistic models at them. It's leaving millions of people feeling like they're just treatment-resistant, when in reality, we might just be looking at the problem through completely the wrong lens. Which brings us to section one, the linear medicine trap, and why average absolutely does not equal normal. For the longest time, the whole conversation around autism and neurodivergence has been stuck in this tug-of-war between two dominant ideas. You've got the medical model on one side, which basically says, hey, something is broken inside this person, so we need to find it and fix it. And then on the other side, you have the social model, which says, no, the person is totally fine, it's our society that's broken and needs fixing. But here's the thing. Neither of these models truly liberates neurodivergent people. I mean, the social model is absolutely essential for unconditional acceptance, but it kind of glosses over the very real, profound physiological suffering some individuals actually go through. So we really, really need a third way. Look, don't get me wrong, linear medicine is brilliant for acute stuff. If you've got appendicitis, a surgeon goes in and takes out your appendix. Boom, fixed. If you've got a bad bacterial infection, antibiotics wipe out the germs. Even with diet, linear models love to tell us all fats are universally good or bad. It's the super clean A fixes B kind of math. But this fails spectacularly when we're dealing with complex, multi-system conditions. It falls into what we call a pill and purpose compression. For example, treating a disruptive, complex, seasonal rhythm in your body like it's just a simple lack of sunlight. And the biggest flaw? Linear medicine basically assumes that every single one of us operates on the exact same underlying physiological architecture, that average is the same thing as normal. But when you treat a beautifully complex adaptive system like a linear machine, you're basically mistaking a massive oversimplification for the whole truth. All right, moving to section two, redefining stress and robustness. We need to look way beyond just something bad happening. To really grasp this third way, we have to completely overhaul our definitions of stress and health. The Evolutionary Stress Framework combines the physics of dissipative structures. So imagine a whirlpool in a river, right? It only keeps its shape by constantly pulling in and consuming the energy of the flowing water. The ESF combines that idea with a formal control theoretic definition of stress. So stress isn't just an emotion. It's not just, oh man, I had a bad day. It is a formal, structural demand on your resources. It's exactly what happens when the demands placed on your regulatory system start to threaten your capacity to actually keep your body functioning. And this brings us to a massively important concept here, regulatory bandwidth. Health is not just a static baseline. It's not a single number on a blood test. It's metastability. Think of it like a tightrope walker. They aren't just standing perfectly, rigidly still. They are constantly making these tiny, fluid adjustments to stay balanced. That's bandwidth. It's having the capacity to navigate a crazy noisy grocery store or a sudden schedule change or a minor cold without totally crashing. High bandwidth means you can absorb a hit and just fluidly reorganize. But depleted bandwidth? That means even the tiniest disruption can force a massive system-wide shutdown. So if bandwidth is your capacity, what happens when it runs out? You get stress incoherence. The crucial takeaway here is that dysfunction is actually a fit problem, not a deficit. Stress incoherence happens when your environment demands a response that your specific personal biology just cannot efficiently provide. The signals guiding your brain's predictions no longer line up with the tools your nervous system actually has. You're operating totally coherently, but you are doing it under profoundly incoherent conditions. Let's dive into section 3, architecture, not a pathology.
let's put on the adaptive lens.
Now, I know that calling something adaptive can sound a bit dismissive to some people. As researcher Lori Hogenkamp points out, for parents of kids with regressive and profound autism, adaptive definitely doesn't mean fine, or healthy, or thriving. The physiological suffering and the profound trade-offs these individuals make are incredibly real. These kids aren't just facing social stigma, they are battling massive metabolic crises, immune system activation, and deep internal chaos inside their own bodies, constantly. We really have to acknowledge that reality.
But to understand it, we need to understand the bioneurotype. In evolutionary biology, an adaptive response just means the system is responding to the conditions it detects in a way that makes sense given its limitations. In profound autism, the developing body is detecting absolute chaos, meaning the internal signals of the body are either way too loud, way too quiet, or just too unpredictable to actually trust. So to survive that chaos, the system makes some extreme regulatory trade-offs. It stabilizes into a highly restricted, super metabolically costly state. It literally shuts down its exploratory capacity just to preserve immediate bare-bones viability. It's not broken. It is doing exactly what it evolved to do to survive a massive crisis. Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, tuning dials versus rewiring. This is the real heart of the science. Mainstream medicine basically assumes human variation is purely parametric. Imagine a giant universal mixing board. The assumption is we all have the exact same wiring, but maybe your sensory volume dial is cranked up a little higher, or your cortisol dial is turned down lower. Now, if variation was just parametric like that, a single drug or therapy would work predictably for everyone, but it doesn't. The Evolutionary Stress Framework argues that neurodivergence represents architectural variation, meaning it's an entirely different wiring board. The core pathways actually connect differently, and this explains so much. It's exactly why the exact same medical intervention can help one person thrive and completely wreck someone else. Because it's all about trade-offs. Every biological architecture achieves stability by specializing against specific types of disruption, which naturally leaves it vulnerable to others. Look at this breakdown. It shows how the exact same architecture that gives someone a specific gift also creates a highly predictable characteristic failure mode when they are put under chronic stress. A highly environmental architecture, that gives you exceptional pattern detection. But push that same person into stress incoherence, and that exact same channel starts generating false positives like paranoia. They aren't separate issues. They are literally two sides of the exact same structural coin.
So ultimately, what this framework points out is that neurodevelopmental variation is variation in the actual architecture itself. This completely reframes autism, ADHD, and other neurotypes. They are not just broken points on some normal line that we somehow need to push back to the center. They are completely different regions in a multidimensional space. You literally cannot just adjust the volume on a biological pathway that isn't even there, or one that's routed through an entirely different sensory setup.
All right, let's zoom all the way out for our final section, Part 5, the power of interdependence and the evolutionary physics behind all of this. We have to shift our focus here, because for decades, we viewed biology purely through this hyper-individualistic lens of competitive independence, survival of the fittest individual. But there's a proposed law of physics called the law of increasing functional information, and it changes everything. It shows that evolving complex systems don't just randomly happen to tolerate diversity. They inevitably generate diverse functional configurations to manage environmental stress. Neurodiversity is not some random genetic accident or a mutation waiting to be filtered out by evolution. It is functional information being actively generated by the physics of complex systems to keep the whole group alive. And that brings us to the absolutely beautiful concept of active complementarity. Think about a monoculture. If everyone in a population shares the exact same biological architecture, sure, they're robust to the same things, but crucially, they're incredibly fragile to the exact same threats. One new disease or environmental shift could wipe everyone out. But when different bioneurotypes collaborate, they don't just awkwardly exist side by side. They literally share energy. They act as a cooperative ecosystem. By pulling their different metabolic limits and perceptual strengths, the group as a whole sees more, catches more, and can solve massive problems that a single type of brain simply never could. So the value of neurodiversity isn't just a nice moral claim about being inclusive. It is literal structural insurance for our entire species. A species absolutely requires distributed fragility to survive unpredictable threats. And this mutual dependence, it is completely symmetric.
Neurodivergent minds aren't just being gracefully supported by typical generalists. Those generic generalists rely heavily on the exceptional pattern detection and specific monitoring of neurodivergent minds. Neither group has a fully viable ecology without the other. We need each other.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought to ponder. If human survival genuinely relies on a diverse, interdependent network of different neuroarchitectures sharing the heavy lifting of a complex world, what happens when we design our schools, our workplaces, and our medical models for only one type of mind? The damage of forcing a one-size-fits-all linear model falls on literally everyone, not just the people who get marginalized. But by embracing the evolutionary stress framework, we can finally stop trying to fix individuals to fit a broken environment. Instead, we can start designing ecosystems that actually tap into the incredible, interdependent architectures of the human species. And that is a total game changer.